the craziness of the NBA playoffs continues on, and even the craziness of the NBA for teams that aren't in the playoffs continues to carry on. We'll obviously get into the second round of the playoffs in this episode, but we did want to warm up with some bigger news from the Bucks. It was something Kevin was asking for last episode. You got your wish.
Oh, that sounds so harsh. Wait a minute. You make me seem like the bad guy early on.
Listen, you said you wanted it last episode.
I did.
You got it. Bud is gone. Coach Bud out after losing to the Heat. He did help lead the team for 5 seasons. Got the Bucks their first title in 50 years. Pretty much at the top of the best teams list for a lot of those years. He had 2 years left on his deal, which was worth around $16 million. That's according to Woj. Just to put it in perspective, I guess, is the Bucks won 58 games this year. They did fall pretty short in a lot of people's expectations in the playoffs. That's why we still have the Heat. Bud is the 4th coach in the past 50 seasons to lead his team to a best record in the NBA and not return the following season. Not that matters, but figured I'd throw that little fun fact out there.
No, I mean, the one fun fact that I guess it's not really fun at all because they're out. A bunch of people are out of their jobs. But the one thing is, you look at the last 4 NBA champions: the Warriors, the Lakers, the Raptors, and the Bucks. Coach Bud's out of a job in Milwaukee. Nick Nurse out of a job in Toronto this year, and Frank Vogel got fired by the Lakers and obviously replaced by Darvin Ham. Steve Kerr, the longtime head coach in Golden State, the only one, I guess, standing tall among these coach champions. But it's a tough situation because you're right. On one hand, like Coach Bud is the only one to win a championship in Milwaukee in the last 50 years. Like they broke the drought. The last time they had won was in the 70s with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Before he was even Kareem, he was still Lou Alcindor at that point. Obviously it's really tough. And because Budenholzer's a great guy too. Like that's the other part of it too, is it's like you never hear about locker room issues with Budenholzer.
Well, and even
he's really well respected by everybody. And like he's been that way since he was in Atlanta too. Like he's definitely one of the more well-liked guys around the league. So that part of it is difficult. I also just it comes down to the X's and O's. And I feel like when I look at what went wrong with Milwaukee this year, when it's such a colossal failure, and you look at this roster and realistically what you can change, I just think sometimes it may be a change in voice. Like they haven't been back to the finals since they won the title a few years ago. I think there are a lot of people who reasonably believe that Brooklyn could have beat them that year had they stayed healthy. Again, what ifs happen in the NBA every year? Like we could do that with every single champion. So I don't want to lean on that too hard. But the reality is that there are times where, I mean, simply where Bud just wasn't playing Giannis. Like Mike Budenholzer is a great coach, but you know who he reminds me of a little bit? I think he's Doc Rivers, low key. Like I think they're both, and again, these are both champion borderline Hall of Fame coaches. So I'm not trying to, because we know how I feel about Doc, but it's like I'm not trying to sound disrespectful in that way because they're not bad. Well, like there's a high floor with both of these coaches. Like they're consistently getting you in the playoffs. Like they're going to get the most out of your guys. I just kind of feel like we know what it is at this point. And when I don't think you're able to make substantial roster changes realistically with Milwaukee this year, nor do I think they maybe should. When I look at the one thing that I go, hey, what's the one thing I can change? It's probably that. And I know there's some people who think it's going to be reactionary, but I just think when it's that colossal of a failure, something has to go. And I think given really the last 2 seasons, it's tough though, because the last season wasn't, and this is the duality of it. Like I'm kind of going back and forth in my own head a little bit because it's like, sure, they lost last year to Boston. They also didn't have Chris Middleton and they lost in 7 games. Like, is that really that disappointing of a loss? Like it's definitely a bummer, but there's a reasonable belief there that if they had Chris Middleton, maybe they would have had a better shot in that game 7 and in that series in general. And then who knows what, but regardless, I think given the way it happened, I do think Budenholzer's job is on the line, and I don't think this is the wrong decision. Now, you have a big question You got to get this right, obviously, because that's the thing is like Milwaukee still has a title window. They've gone all in with this roster. We know the draft capital that they gave up to get Drew Holiday a few years ago. They paid big money to Chris Middleton. You've got a guy like Brook Lopez who's still great, but in the older part of his career, like there's a lot of vets on that roster too. They really got to nail this next hire. You wonder, I don't want to say he's got buyer's remorse, but like, I wonder how Ime Udoka feels about taking that job in Houston. Even Quinn Snyder to an extent in Atlanta. And I know they had some already, positive results in Atlanta, I think early on, but yeah, you want to talk about, I mean, coaching arguably the best player in the NBA. Yeah, you got to feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, I would imagine like Nick Nurse is like, hey, okay, maybe this is going to work out. I was going to consider.
It would be wild because the Raptors genuinely had interest when they hired Nick Nurse after they let Dwayne Casey go, and bringing in Budenholzer. Like, it would be kind of funny if Budenholzer, geez, I keep calling, I didn't know whether I wanted to call him Coach Bud or Budenholzer, so I did both. If Budenholzer ends up in Toronto, and Nick Nurse then ends up in Milwaukee, like that would just be kind of fitting or just be funny for the narrative's sake. But
well, and it's one thing that I wanted to bring up would be is the leash and the expectations with coaches like getting too short? Like, are we getting too impatient with coaches who have proven themselves, but then maybe have like 2 or 3 down years? We went through the list of coaches that have won that are no longer with those teams. Some firing, some acting or leaving on their own. But is it one of those things where we're holding them to a standard that they set, obviously, because they won? But then it's like, if you don't get it, is it such like what have you done for me now mindset to be like, well, you haven't won in the last 2 years, so we're going to bail? Or is it one of those things where, like, because some of the players have so much power, you want to make sure you don't upset, those players? You want to make sure you show them you're making changes, even though they're doing good, whether it's record-wise, whether it's going far in the playoffs, whatever it is. Is it a way to show face to the players, to say, to your star players, to say, hey, don't leave or don't get upset here. We're trying to fix the fact that we didn't win the past 2 years, even though we won 3 years ago.
I mean, I think it's situational a lot of the times, but I don't think overall the NBA has an issue with it. I think bad franchises have an issue with it. Like, I think if you're firing coaches left and right, then of course that's not good for anybody. That's not good for any superstar. Like, how can you expect to have the consistency if you just are going back and forth? I mean, Budenholzer had a good tenure here, obviously. I think it's, it was up and down. Like, they had the ultimate high, and that's winning the championship. And I think that's why this is tough. If Budenholzer never won a championship, I think there would have been people who have been like, why didn't this happen already?
If they didn't win, I think he would have already been gone.
I mean, you look at some of the other years, like, go back to 2019, they had a 2-0 lead against the Bucks in against the Raptors, in the conference finals, and they blew that series in the bubble. How Miami came out and beat them because, it feels like they adjusted a little bit better. Even this year, like the way that Miami adjusted, like I thought this playoffs in particular, not that he needs to prove it really to anyone, but I mean, you look at the master class that Eric Spoelstra is putting on in Miami. It just, I don't know. It feels like Budenholzer's just always had a little bit of an advantage, obviously, when you're coaching Giannis. Like, Giannis cleans up for a lot, and that helps too.
Well,
I don't think he should be faulted for that either. And the Bucks have crushed the regular season his entire tenure here. Like, they're consistently in the battle for the number 1 seed. Again, it's tough because he's a champion. That's why I don't think his tenure will ever be a failure. Like, he will never call this a failure, but I don't think this is a reactionary firing either. Like, I think this is, they haven't done as well since 2021 in the playoffs. And now when you lose to an 8 seed, especially an undermanned 8 seed, when you have your whole roster, like this is the one where you kind of lose the benefit of the doubt a little bit.
And it's one of those things where, then if you wanted to start debating it, you go back and look at when he took over for Atlanta. Like, what were they at that point, win-loss wise? Their first year, I believe they were 38-44. Next year, they went 60-22. That's 2014, 2015. So it's like, Was that jump because of him? Was that, what happened? And does he get a lot of credit for that? Or did he, in a way, get quote unquote bailed out for that?
Yeah.
And so, it's just one of those things. But either way, I thought it was funny because well, not funny, but we had talked about it last week. You had
Yeah.
wanted it, and now here we are. And so we'll see where they go.
He deserves a lot of credit for shifting the culture there.
Yeah.
I definitely think, you look at where they were with Jason Kidd when they came in, like the Bucks were going to figure it out with Giannis no matter what as he developed. But at the same time, like Budenholzer was the coach that they brought in to really give them legitimacy and teach them the winning habits. And I think he does deserve a lot of credit on that front. Like, and that obviously culminates in the championship. Like Mike Budenholzer will likely be a Hall of Famer one day. I think he deserves a lot of I'm not trying to completely dump on him here. He will no doubt, I think, have another NBA job whenever he chooses to. Like his name will be always one of those guys that's mentioned in a coaching pool of candidates. But yeah, I think unfortunately something had to change. And unless you're radically reshaping the roster, which I just don't think they're going to for a number of reasons. Like I think it's tough with the cap right now. But I think realistically, you don't want to I don't think you want to punt any years of Giannis's prime. And in 2 years, you will have a lot more cap space because some of their bigger contracts start to wrap up. So at that point, you could almost sell yourself on retooling a little bit because as long as you have Giannis, you're going to be competing. And so I think maybe, but regardless, the Bucks, if they want to keep Giannis happy, obviously need to nail this coaching hire too. You would imagine that he's aware of whoever is coming in. Like, I don't think they're going to hire somebody without tipping him off
or promoting from within. Because I see right now the betting odds are for Charles Lee, who's already an assistant there. Which I wonder if that comes into conversation too for either a check on Coach Bud's side or a knock on Coach Bud's side is. He's had a lot of assistants under him get promoted and go coaching, Darvin Ham. Now they're talking about Charles Lee, and oh my gosh, coach of the Hawks now?
Quinn Snyder?
Snyder was under Bud in Atlanta, before he went to Utah. So there's a lot of those coaches that are coming out from under his side of Pop's tree. So I wonder if that is a perk or a knock in the Bud conversation.
Oh, I definitely think it's only a benefit to him. Like if you have successful assistants, I mean that's part of Popovich's resume too, right? That he's just cranked out so many high level assistants who have gone on to be successful NBA coaches, obviously in their own right. So no, I think that only helps his case. And I mean, again, the fact that he's well liked too. I mean, nobody in Atlanta, nobody in Milwaukee speaks bad about Coach Bud. Like keeping a good rep like that will help you get another job pretty quickly.
Although I wonder if Giannis's comments post loss to the Heat were a little bit of hey, what were with those rotations? Why weren't we making changes?
Yeah, and I think that's what was kind of what I alluded to last week is that I think when that's coming, like I don't think Bud had a particularly good series, and that's why I think in favor now. Like there have been times where he hasn't adjusted, and again, it's hard to say this when you win a championship. Like it's so hard to win a championship, so he has a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. But it's also like, yeah, there are other seasons where I know Giannis may not want to hear it, but they've been in a failure at points too. So, and I think this one in particular, like when something this drastic happens,
I
just think something has to give, and that's just unfortunate. In honor of the royal coronation over in the UK today, them's the breaks sometimes. Welcome everybody to the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. My name is Kevin Rayfuse. Joining me as always, my co-host Justin Kuzar.
Folks out here really firing championship coaches as soon as they don't win the chip.
Wow. Oh man, now they're just double making them feel bad. Okay, so is it a current player or is it a Oh, is this Dame?
This is Dame.
Dame's been tweeting a lot recently. That's the only reason I've been thinking about that. Dame has had I feel like Dame's been pulling up at every playoff game randomly, which I mean, good for him. Like, yo, if you love hoops and you want to live it, I'm genuinely not knocking that at all.
Yeah,
I
you just run into
court side. It's just funny. It's just he's been on all over.
Well, you
Twitter.
You just run into a situation where if you show up, I don't know, and maybe not with Dame because maybe they're not talking about it as much, but God forbid an NBA player goes to another two teams playing, immediate trade rumors will start. Be like, oh my God, they want to go to
Oh
said
yeah, of
team, you know?
course. Like,
So you got to be careful with that.
I mean, look, if anything, I feel like you got to enjoy that, right? And troll everybody.
Oh, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Just only keep showing up at contenders games. Really, really make everybody ask. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. We'll read them on the podcast. If you're not an Apple user, Google Play Store, Spreaker, Spotify, TuneIn, Amazon Music, Stitcher, Google Play Store, anywhere you find a podcast, you can find us.
And we are on YouTube. You can find us there. Just search Drive and Dish NBA on YouTube, and you can subscribe so you know when the next episodes are coming out.
And now a word from our sponsors.
So we jump into the second round of the NBA playoffs. I guess let's start out west. We'll start Suns Nuggets since that was the latest game that just happened for us. Game 3 just happened for us for continuity's sake. Last night, we are recording on Saturday, Phoenix won 121 to 114 over Denver, who has still the lead in the series 2-1. Booker and Kevin Durant went off. I don't really feel like anybody else on the Suns scored at all.
Booker went off. That's all that matters. Booker, I feel like we just got to even talk about that first. Booker went off. 20 of 25 from the field for 47 points. Like, the efficiency, like, bro, you had 47 points and you shot over 80% from the field. That is insane.
Yeah, I just don't think it's a recipe for winning 3 more games.
Of course it's not. And that's what we can get into in a little bit. But like, I want to, like, that was we said somebody's going to have to be a superhero, and
Book did it. Did it sound like? Did you watch the post game? It sounded like Kevin Durant was about to cry when talking about Booker. Like I thought he was about to cry.
Came there for, and I mean, he that's exactly when. There was a tweet from last year where I think Book had a crazy amount of points on like 80% from the field. So it was remarkably close to the stat line he put up the other night.
Yep.
And I mean, look, they needed it. I mean, because you're talking about Chris Paul, obviously, and the curse of Chris Paul's, playoff luck continues now with this latest injury, out for game 3, likely going to be missing through game 5 at the minimum.
Are we at a point now? We might have already been there, but are we at a point now where between Harden and Chris Paul, they've like cemented their postseason legacy at this point? Of always kind of coming up short or not bringing it or getting injured?
Yeah, Chris Paul's is more tragic, I think, than performance-based. Harden's has been more performance-based, unfortunately, and we'll get that because, I mean, you have the ultimate yin and yang of James Harden experience this playoff series. But no, sticking here, yeah, I mean, with Chris Paul for sure, because it's been a lot of injuries, right? It's like, you win the game 7, that series against the Spurs in one of his better performances, but then he gets hurt. Obviously, with the cruelest one, I think, for him is probably Houston, that Houston series when, you gut out that crazy win against the Warriors in the peak of their prime, and then you get hurt at the end of, what was that? Was that game 6? That wasn't game 7, but it was either at the end of game 5 or I think it was 5 because you were up 3-2. But then once Chris Paul was out, they got him back for game 7, but clearly wasn't even close to 100%. Like, hamstring injuries are so difficult to deal with. But yeah, I mean, he's had a ton from the injury front. But I mean, kind of to your point, I don't think it might have mattered this year. And that's the thing is, like, the Nuggets so thoroughly beat them on their home floor in game 1 and game 2. And even with this, like, Phoenix had to win this game. Like, you go down 3-0, obviously that series is over.
Yeah,
like,
not happening. Yeah.
You need to win both these games, but you get the job done on your home floor. You're hoping that fires you up, but it's like, Kevin Durant had 39 points. Wasn't really that efficient from the field, honestly. I mean, he was 12 of 31 shooting. He did a great job of getting to the free throw line, though. Like, he lived off there, 16 attempts. The rest of the team had 2 for some perspective. Just Book. But yeah, you're right. Like, I've got them scoring, basically 90 points together. And you look at the rest of the roster, Cam Payne had 7, and he's starting for Chris Paul. DeAndre Ayton, who I don't know what's going on there again. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about his defensive motor this series, but last night they caught him in the huddle, not high-fiving Chris Paul, and he just walked out of the stadium with no media availability, only at 4 points. Okogie has 2 points.
And to that, he didn't end the game.
No,
Landale did.
no, and I mean Landale's up to play. I mean, he played 22 minutes in game 3, like, and that's the crazy part is that he's looked better, and I think that's part of the issue with Phoenix as well is that DeAndre Ayton just I think is super average at best. Like this is 2 straight playoffs now where Ayton has struggled.
Which is
Um,
interesting. So I just pulled up the on-off stats for last night. I think this is for last night, and they were plus 10 when Landale was on the court.
yeah,
So
and I don't love plus minus always as a stat, but yeah, I mean, I just think even with the eye test, like when you looked at the
yeah,
flow of the offense, it felt like they were moving a little bit better. Like Aiton just defensively, I don't know, like it goes back to the constant concern with him, right? Is it just feels like his motor's not there. Like it just feels like there's a lot of times where he's just not really busting his rear end like that. And in the playoffs against a team like Denver, that's somebody you have to. Like we're in the second round now. What are we
yeah,
talking about? Like you can't sleepwalk your way through this. But and I do. I
and
mean, Phoenix, man, you want to talk about something that I've been wrong on? Like, woof, I'm looking real bad on that
well,
front.
and to that, to your point with the Ayton stuff, is like we pegged him as somebody that was gonna have to have a big series trying to
Yeah.
slow up Jokic, or at least get in his face and do something with him. And it just kind of feels as if maybe he hasn't risen to the occasion.
No, and I mean he's shooting efficiently. Like that's the thing. He's 7 to 10 from the field in game 2. He's 7 to 11 from the field in game 1, but he had 14 points both of those games. He's got 7 rebounds in game 1. Like he's got 8 rebounds in game 2. Like that's just not really a forceful game from your center. And the problem is like, yeah, you've got Durant and Booker scoring, but when they've traded all their depth, they have to be better on the offensive front than they're getting out of them. And I just don't know that they can be. And that's the issue that I run into with Phoenix. Like, Book and KD are special. Like that, they're going to get you a zillion points, but like it's a greater extent. Like, obviously, they're a lot better than Dallas was. It's not quite that bad, but like it does. It reminds me of what was going on in Dallas at the end of the season once they traded for Kyrie.
because like I said, it's not saying they're easy to game plan for, but if you can set it where it's like those two aren't going to beat us, everybody else has to, you feel kind of confident when you look at the Nuggets where you got 30 last night from Jokic, you got 21 from Porter Jr., you got 32 from Murray, you got 9 from Aaron Gordon, which is a little lower,
Yeah, it was by far Aaron Gordon's worst offensive game of the
but
series.
But even then, it's like you look at, while his offense wasn't there, Aaron Gordon still grabbed you 7 boards. Porter grabbed you 12. Jokic grabbed you 17. Like, they out-rebounded him by 10 rebounds.
Yeah,
And
it's way more balanced. Like
yes,
that's just simply what it's been for Denver. And I mean, part of it last night, I think, you mentioned Aaron Gordon and some of the other guys with Denver, like their shooting splits just went down on the road. I mean, Aaron
yeah.
Gordon was 3 of 13 last night for 3 points. Like he just
Oh
put
for
up a
3 from
stinker a
3.
little
Yeah,
bit.
right.
Yeah, Kentavious Caldwell Pope had 2 points last night. They're if anything, I think you feel good because Denver's big 3 played pretty well. I mean, Murray's got
hmm
32 points, Jokic had 30. But it is, I mean, you go back to the games they won, it's way more balanced. Like you got your contributions. Game 2, Durant had 24 points, Devin Booker had 35. The next highest was Ayton with 14. You go down to Denver, Aaron Gordon had 16, Jokic had 39. Obviously, he went off that game. And he cleaned up for Jamal Murray. Like when Jamal Murray only had 10 points, Kentavious Caldwell Pope at 14, but even their bench a little bit. Like a guy like Bruce Brown came in and give them 9 points. Like, and that was a game which was, I mean, that was ugly. I mean, 97 to 87, like it looked like a 90s game. That first game, it looks a lot better. And again, part of this too, I think helps when you're at home. It's just a fact of the NBA that your role guys genuinely play better at home. But
Well,
it's like when you got 23 out of Aaron Gordon, when Porter only gives you 10, like Bruce Brown, and again, another 14 off the bench, like that really just they have more. And this is kind of a theme of a little bit later in this episode. We'll talk about this with Philly and Boston, but it's just like Denver's margin for error is so much higher than Phoenix is. Like if Kevin Durant has an off night, if Devin Booker
it's
isn't
over.
absolutely flame throwing, it doesn't feel like they can hang with them. Like I'm never going to just rule Phoenix dead in the water because of them, but I don't know. Like I could see this series being over in 5. Like I think it's going 6 max. I think Denver's going to pretty convincingly move on to the conference finals. Like, that's my impression after 3 games.
I think if the Suns are going to continue to win or try to, get back in it, they got to focus on pushing the pace of play. I mean, they had 23 fast break points in the game that they won compared to Denver's 11. So I think if you can kind of get out and transition, you start pushing the pace a little bit more, that will benefit, to me, Phoenix more than Denver, where Denver, in my mind, likes to chill it out a little bit more, like play their pace. And so if the Suns can make them uncomfortable, keep them out of that, force a few more turnovers, get some steals, and capitalize on those fast break points, and then you're rolling.
Mm.
So it doesn't feel, even though it was a big win and Booker went off, the overarching, oh man, who else is going to help them, still looms.
No, you're going to need that. Like, if Booker does that every game, then of course they're going to have a chance. Or KD, likewise.
Yeah.
If KD has a performance like that, and they are capable of that, like, that's why, you bet on this Phoenix team.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know. There's not much I've seen in this series that makes me feel confident about Phoenix advancing.
I agree. Yeah.
So then switching gears and going to the Lakers and the Warriors, which we've only got 2 games of this series. They will be playing later tonight. We're recording on a Saturday. But the Lakers coming out and getting the W in game 1 on the road in San Francisco. And then the Warriors responding pretty convincingly, which I think it's like 17 in a row. If the home team has lost game 1 of a series in the second round, that they've bounced back and gotten the win. Golden State, a pretty convincing 27-point win. But yeah, I mean, this is a series that is definitely, it is a high level series that a lot of people have been looking forward to. Obviously, the latest chapter of LeBron James versus Steph Curry. The first 2 games have been a lot of fun. Credit obviously for Golden State for adjusting in game 2. And it was surprising. I got to be honest. I didn't think it'd be by putting JaMychal Green in the starting lineup, especially for taking Kevon Looney out, somebody who, I mean, he's really been one of their most consistent guys the entire playoffs. You talk about that Sacramento series. I mean, he was one of the real heroes, dominating the boards and really controlling the pace there. But give JaMychal Green a lot of credit. He let it fly. The adjustment worked. And we're going 1-1 back to LA. Anthony Davis, the big story in game 2, game 1, I should say, an absolute masterpiece from him. 30 and 20, the first Lakers center to do that since Shaq. I don't know. How you feeling about this series so far? Like, I think this is one of the ones that does have a little more potential to go the distance. And, I think we've seen good punches from both sides so far.
Yeah, I think it will go the distance. I also think that the Lakers pretty much are going to live and die by Anthony Davis. Like you said, he had an amazing first game, 30 points, 23 rebounds, like you alluded to, and then comes out and just puts out a stinker and had 11 points, 7 rebounds. But then if you even go back into Memphis, right? The win against Memphis, the last win, he had an okay game, 16 points, 14 rebounds. But then the game before that, 31 points, 19 rebounds. And then you go back to Monday, April 24th, which was their overtime win against Memphis. He had 12 points and 11 rebounds. So you're kind of seeing this roller coaster up and down, heartbeat monitor kind of game. So if we follow that trend, we're going to get a 30 bomb from Anthony Davis tonight.
Yeah. And I mean, back on his home floor, too. You think there's going to be that boost a little bit. I mean, look, if Anthony Davis is going to play like that, like he did in game 1, then the Warriors really just have no matchup. Like, as great defensively as Draymond is, and as good as and Looney can hold up, if Anthony Davis could play like that, I mean, he dominated the interior. Like, he was everywhere. I mean, defensively, too. That was the biggest thing. Because it's not just, I mean, that's part of the brilliance of Steph Curry, right? Is like Steph doesn't just beat you with threes. He's elite at finishing in the lane. And Anthony Davis just completely snuffed it out. At that point, the Lakers do have a lot of, pretty good perimeter defenders, guys who can hang out there a little bit. You'll like your chances to limit them. Jared Vanderbilt, for example, has done a really good job this series. He's been kind of a pest. I mean, really, this whole playoff run, he's been a big time pest for them. That is the one element that the Lakers have that they just can't match up with. On the other side, I'm surprised the Warriors honestly haven't attacked LeBron more. Like, it's a weird thing to think about LeBron being mortal. And he's still out there, giving you 20 plus a night, but he's clearly playing on one foot right now. Like, he's going to have surgery on that foot in the offseason. I'm almost a little surprised that they didn't try to press that advantage, like try to get him in pick and roll coverage, like whatever it may be. Because that is somewhere where he's just not the defensive force that we're used to seeing him as.
Well, and I also say if you're the Lakers, what you can kind of chalk yourself up to in a way, I think, is Golden State played pretty much like perfect in that game. Like Clay went off. Curry didn't have to handle an offensive load, so he sat back and kind of was distributing the ball around. Like you were saying, I mean, they had 5 guys with double-digit points. Yeah. Clay was like, he is 8 for 11 from 3. The whole team as a whole shot 50% from 3, 62% free throw. Like, that's a pretty damn good efficiency and percentage. So if you're the Lakers, you kind of also look at it as, what do we need to fix? But also they should come back down to earth a tad.
Well, and the Lakers were also way more rested for game 1. I think that's the other thing you take into effect if you're the Warriors. It's like, look, you're coming off a 7-game battle with Sacramento.
Yeah.
And we're not going to do a full deep dive on them. We probably should at some point. Because we didn't, cheat them. All the other first round exits got a full deep dive, and Sacramento definitely deserves that. That was an incredible series. So I mean, of course, that factors in as well. In terms of them of getting that rest. I think if you're the Warriors, you got to feel pretty good considering with that rest, like the Lakers won by 5 points. And then if you're the Warriors, the way you respond and win big, like it kind of reminded me of Boston's win against the Sixers in game 2, where it's like, like let's take a step back and remind ourselves who we are for a little bit, like what this can look like when we're playing our game. And it is. I think this game 3 is crucial tonight. I mean, the Lakers at the bare minimum obviously have to get a split on their home floor. But I think there is a little bit more pressure on the Lakers to win tonight. You want that 2-1 lead, kind of like, look, you got to put the Warriors away. Like we saw what this is, that we know what they're capable of coming back from, again, in that Sacramento series, bouncing back from 2-0. So, I do think the Lakers come out and get a win tonight. I think we're gonna get their best game. But I think the Warriors will without a doubt get the split. Like I think we're gonna be tied going back to game 5.
And it looks like the Lakers are favored, at least according to the betting apps, which kind of surprises me. I feel like the average NBA fan would just go with Curry and the Warriors, but
yeah, well, the defending champs, like it does, but it always feels like, and it's something that I think it was Draymond who talked about on his podcast where, I do think a lot of times maybe we're ready to replace the old guard and not, you're always trying to find out what's next. But, you look at some of the older guys that have had impacts. I mean, it's going to be a weird episode. This would have maybe been better after game 1, but like the impact that Harden had in game 1, the continued impact that Jimmy Butler's had in Miami, well into his 30s now at this point.
Yeah.
All the Warriors are well into their 30s now. LeBron is obviously 38 years old. Like, there are, these guys aren't going to be doing it that much longer in the grand scheme of things. Like, I know they're, especially with the Warriors, I could imagine there's a pretty large amount of the NBA fan base that's going, hey, what, like enough already. Like, when are they going to knock this off and go away? But, the reality is it's like, kind of enjoy the ride while you're here too.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, without a doubt, a super fun series there. We're going to talk about the East here in a little bit, but first, of course, who's balling, who's fallen, our NBA version of the stock market. We always like to start with the good before the bad. I think we may have done this 2 episodes now, so we're kind of cheating a little bit. We got to knock this off, but y'all knew this was a special one. Co-balling this week, our good friend, of course, of the podcast, Joel Embiid winning the MVP award, his first MVP of his career. And again, obviously it spoiled a little bit in game 3 with the loss to Boston, but a super great ceremony before the game. I think obviously the moment that got everybody is when his son ran out onto the floor and he just broke down immediately. I love the shout out to Ba Mute too. And I think that kind of, goes back to what I want to talk about here is just like how improbable of a story this is and how, I mean, coming from Cameroon never playing organized basketball until he was late into his teens. You talk about so many of these guys are these AAU phenoms, and it's like Embiid was just playing volleyball in Cameroon, and just got discovered at a camp randomly. And then, the odds of him coming to the NBA, or, coming to America, being, good enough in high school to get a D1 scholarship from Kansas, and then all the injury setbacks. I mean, I just like, and I tweeted this, but it's like, I mean, Justin, think about where we were when we started this podcast, and how big of, I remember that was the first draft we covered that off season in season 1. And I remember the foot injury really shaking it up. I mean, he was going to go number 1 to Cleveland until he broke his foot in those pregame workouts. And that's
Yep.
what, led to Wiggins going 1. And obviously that set off a whole chain of events as well. But, those first 2 years, and, obviously the whole process era, and those limited games, but when you started to see in 2016 what it could be when he finally comes back. And it's just the fact that, I just think, again, what he's done for this franchise, what a big part. And I think specifically in this podcast, like, not to get sappy about it, but that's with me, like, this is something that I think a lot of times is like got you and I super into the NBA, and wanted to do this sport when we did the podcast. And it's really been, obviously we've been 2 of the bigger process defenders, and it feels like, I mean, nothing would be a bigger vindication than a championship, but it certainly feels like vindication here. Like, this is what we were arguing the whole time, is that, the point of all that losing was to potentially get a guy who could win an MVP award and who could really shift the fortunes of this franchise. And I think when you talk about what Embiid has meant to this franchise for the past 10 years, everything that he's had to deal with on and off the court, the GM changes. Obviously, I selfishly love the shout out to Sam Hinkie as well. It was, I don't know. It made me way happier than I expected. Like, I'm not one of the, I guess I just didn't realize how happy it was going to make me to see him win that MVP award until he did, and just started talking about it. And you just sit back and you appreciate, like, obviously being a Sixers fan, as we will certainly get into in a little bit, can be hella frustrating at times, but
Yeah.
Joel Embiid is not a part of that. And it's just, you can't take these times for granted. Like, it has been, the last MVP the Sixers had was Iverson in 01. Like, I remember being in 4th grade when that happened. Here we are. We don't know how often these moments are going to happen. And so it really, makes you appreciate it.
Well, and it's one of those things where we almost have to have like a in memoriam for all the players that came through to get us Embiid. You think of like Michael Carter Williams, Nerlens
Who gave him a
Noel,
shout out, by the way, and Embiid posted on Instagram, which I love to see. Like, that's another heartwarming moment.
like Jahlil Okafor. Like, dude, so many guys came through and were supposed to be the like quote unquote dude to do it, and
They
then
still are. That's the worst part. That's like the worst part is that they all still are, and that's why we keep not winning a title. Is because everybody keeps failing, or we let the one dude who is the dude, Jimmy Butler, walk out the door.
Well, also that, but yeah, man, it makes you think about all the it makes me think about all the people I thought were going to be the Embiid level before Embiid was able to be there and be the Embiid level. Like, I always thought, we talk about it when Michael Carter Williams beat the Big 3 Heat, like their 3rd game in, and I was like, oh man, this
first
guy
game in, bro. That was the first game he ever played. That was number 1.
Yeah, it was like, I was like, oh boy, here we go. This is great. And then, things went differently. And then obviously the Embiid injury. We even thought, when you're like, he comes in, it's like, all right, now he's hurt. And it's like, okay, well, we got to wait another year. And, that year sucked. And so it's just like, man, oh man, a very odd journey to get to that point. But like you said, obviously from Embiid, very emotional because of all the things he's gone through to get to that point too. So it was cool to see him kind of show that side a little bit.
All right, so your Fallen in a way is way more wholesome. So I feel like you should go first, because ours, we're gonna kind of not argue a little bit, but I feel like there's some people who need to we need to discuss a little bit. So I'm gonna have you go first.
So we actually, my wife's family actually just had a situation like this where like your own son puts your foot in your mouth for you.
The youth, you gotta love
Yeah.
the youth. They always tell the truth.
So I'll tell that story first. We were at a wedding in New Jersey, actually the same place Snooki got married, in case anybody wants to look it up.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Little flex, but is it? I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I'm like, yeah, maybe.
But either way, so we're there, and afterwards, or during the wedding, it was a really long wedding, really extravagant. Halfway through, they take the one wall off, and as it goes away, it just reveals a massive candy buffet of any kind of candy you could ever think of.
Okay,
and so
I like it.
Nicole's cousins, who are very young at this point, go crazy. Like they're like
just load the kids up on sugar.
It's like they just handed them a whole thing of crack, like they were going crazy. And I jokingly said to one of them, better be careful, you're going to puke if you have too much. And mind you, we have been drinking hard for like hours.
Yeah, it's a wedding.
Yep. And so he's like, no, I won't. I'll be fine. As we're leaving, kid pukes. And so the next morning, we're all over at the one house, hungover, waiting for those kids and the mom, who's the aunt, to show up. And they show up, and everyone is like, "Oh, Tommy partied too hard, puked last night." And he goes, "Well, I'm not the only one that puked. Mommy puked too." And
wow.
We're like,
"Oh, man."
And she's like, thanks for throwing me under the bus.
Right. Like, I was cleaning you up, bud. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So, and then all her brothers were giving her a hard time all day. Like, hey,
Especially while you're hungover, just what you want to hear.
Right. So to that, Draymond Green was talking post game, and he said that he was in the gym. His quote was, "I was in the gym last night with my son DJ," and his son's sitting there with him, goes, "No, I wasn't." It's like, oh damn, okay, well, never mind. Jeez.
Dre, the podcast studio isn't the gym, bud. Like, I appreciate it. Maybe you're getting the mental reps in, but
I know, right?
No,
and to that, I don't know why you just made me think of this. CJ McCollum was on ESPN yesterday, talking about Golden State and some things that they were doing. And I thought it was interesting because CJ was pointing out a time where they used Steph as an off-ball screen, and I think it was more of a diversion to make them think the ball was going to Steph, and then either Clay or somebody else took it. And CJ McCollum literally on air was like, so this is what they're doing with Steph. It's pretty good. We're definitely going to implement this next year for us. And I was like, okay, fair enough.
I mean, it's a copycat league. Like, listen, it's a copycat league. A lot of times it's just about the personnel. Like, you can copy the Warriors offense all you want. It's just until you have Steph Curry, it may not work.
Right. Or you have someone that's hot in the game that they're like, oh my God, this guy's not missing. That's when you start throwing some diversion off-ball screens at them and freeing up some other guys to maybe get hot and going. But either way, a little wholesome moment, funny moment from the playoffs for Draymond Green and his family.
Yeah, less wholesome moment is my fallen, and that is the Dillon Brooks. And I mean, I guess it's Dillon Brooks and the Memphis Grizzlies, but it's really less about Dillon Brooks. So we got the Shams tweet that said, under no circumstances will the Memphis Grizzlies be bringing Dillon Brooks back. And that to me is the part that I'm falling with for the Grizzlies, because I just think it's gross. Like, I think it's really just nasty the way that the Grizzlies handled this, and under any circumstances, like, they made it seem like this guy's a serial killer and that, he was never going to have an NBA contract again. And he's the sole reason they lost. Like, and credit to Perk for really kind of bringing it. I mean, he was the first one to kind of talk about it, but it is, I mean, like, I think a lot of things went wrong with the Grizzlies this year that obviously got exposed in the playoffs by the Lakers. But Dillon Brooks was far from it. Like, yeah, the Grizzlies got way too involved in just the off the court and the trash talk on the court, I think. And I mean, that was pretty well exposed to everybody this year. I think there's no doubt about, like, the Grizzlies, talking trash is one thing, but I think, when it overwhelms you to the point that it feels like it's helping you lose games, that's kind of where it got with them this year. And I think that's been part of the problem. At the
And I
same
think
time,
and I think Dylan Brooks kind of became the face of that, which I think is part of the problem.
he did. And again, Dylan Brooks poked the bear. Like, he made a lot of silly comments. Like, he's been one of the main antagonizers against the Warriors. Like, the I don't like Draymond Green straight up. Obviously had the comments before the Lakers against LeBron. I don't respect you till you drop 40 on me. They got smoked in the last game. That completely backfired. And so I understand that. Like, Dylan Brooks has been rightfully dragged by a lot of people for
Yeah.
just kind of, because it's like, Dylan Brooks is a good NBA player. Like, he's definitely a net positive defender.
It's just the
He's
offense side that is kind of barren. I remember you, me, and Tim, we would argue so much about who was it on the Thunder?
Robertson.
Robertson, yes, because he was like a desert when it came to offense, but he was a
Dylan Brooks is not
lockdown
that
D.
extreme. He's not that much of a desert.
No, but that's what it was for the Thunder. Remember that? And I remember us being like, well, when you have the offensive power that you have on the Thunder, like, you don't need him to score. You need him to focus on defense. The Memphis Grizzlies didn't have that level of offense where they could have somebody on the court that teams could essentially, in a way, like, disrespect, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, they were rightfully, injury-wise too, had a number of problems. I mean, namely Steven Adams, the biggest one there. Brandon
Yeah.
Clark, though, was missing as well. Like, Dylan Brooks is not going to be your off. Like, Dylan Brooks is a role player. Like, he's a good guy off the bench. And that's kind of the thing, is like, you get all the jokes where it's like, oh, he's going to go to China now, where it's like, no, Dylan Brooks should rightfully get another NBA contract. But that's kind of my point, is it's like, Dylan Brooks is a 6-year veteran on the Memphis Grizzlies. Like, when you look at that locker room and you look at this culture that they built, and one that, by the way, was pretty beloved up until about 2 years ago, is really when the tide started to shift a little bit. It feels like on Memphis, like that first year Memphis broke through, Ja's rookie year, was one of the like, they were the darling of the league, the way that, I feel like the Kings were this year, for example. That it's really just like Dylan Brooks was a big part of that, right? Like, he was a big part of building that identity. Like, this is a guy who was pretty well liked in the locker. And I'm glad one of his teammates, I forget where Desmond Bain was. I forget what show he was on. He was on with Stephen A. Smith during that cast during the games. And, he finally, like, Desmond Bain came out, and obviously one of the leaders in that locker room, and said, like, hey, by the way, we like Dylan Brooks in the locker room. Like, all this talk about, maybe his distraction has gone too far. And I do think it did to an extent, but it's not, his teammates weren't out there bashing him. Like, Ja Morant stuck up for him too during the season. And that's why I just think this is so nasty by the Memphis Grizzlies, that they use this language, like, under any circumstance. Like, that's the type of thing that destroys a career. And I mean, his agent's spoken out against Shams too. Like, I think because the Grizzlies denied it, of course. And so, we'll never really get the real answer here, but like, regardless, like, that's just nasty work by everybody all in that situation. Like, I understand that it ended badly, but I don't like that they just threw him out under the bus. It was like, this is it, we're banishing Dylan Brooks and suddenly we've solved all our problems and we're going to be back. Like, that's just really unfair for a guy who was there for 6 years. I don't think he deserved that.
And yeah, you're right. It gives you the, like, even every other team now is going to be like, wow, and under any circumstance, what else do you,
serial killer? Like, what's going on out here?
what else do you know about him that we don't know, that maybe hasn't come to public and blah blah blah. But I see the reason I think I understand what they're trying to say. Like, they said, like, to me, it's like Memphis needs to do a full culture reset. And so that's why I think, like, under any circumstances, we're not bringing him back. He's the face of this part of the culture that we need to change, whether he likes it or not.
Yeah, but he's not the only one, and that's my point.
I know. And I think any NBA team that needs help on the defensive side should want him. Like, would definitely pick him up, would go for it. It's just, man, oh man, I can't wait to whatever team he goes to. Whenever they go up against Grizzlies, that better be televised, because holy moly.
Yeah, 100%. And that's just kind of my thing, is it's like, look, if you want to move on, because
move
again,
on.
you
But
want to
yeah,
shift the culture, and you don't feel like you liked his antics against the Lakers, and you think he's asking for way more money than he's worth, which is also a possibility in these negotiations. Like, then that's fine, so be it. I'm okay with that, but just like don't do that under any circumstances. Like
yeah,
that's a bad look for you organizationally. Like beyond Dylan Brooks, it's like if I'm a free agent, I'm looking at that language and saying, "Oh, word, this is what you feel about me when it goes wrong." Like
that's messed up.
this isn't
Yeah,
a this isn't a 1 year signing with a history of like repeated offenses here. Like I don't know. I thought that language was disappointing.
I agree. So
Now,
we
speaking of
jump.
disappointing,
Well, yeah. Do you want to start with Sixers?
yeah, of course we got to start with
Okay.
Sixers Celtics game 3. I mean, there's just more. There's been more games to put it bluntly. Like game
Right.
3 of Miami Knicks is going to happen later this afternoon. I mean, it's a 3:30 p.m. start, so we'll have a bit more of an idea
And
there.
I thoroughly enjoy watching that more than watching the 76ers.
Game 2 was kind of ugly. I was gonna say, do you with everybody being
Yes.
out right now?
I
But
literally would rather watch that
no,
game.
I know. But so Sixers Celtics, the Celtics are up 2-1 as of recording this episode. The Sixers won game 1. Of course, an absolute masterpiece from James Harden in Boston, 45 points, a new playoff career high for him. Of course, hit the game winner, essentially the game winner with like 8 seconds left. Hit that 3 to go up 2. Then they got the stop. Paul Reed hit the free throws to ice it. That was without a Joel Embiid. Boston bounced it back, winning huge in game 2 on their home floor. And then going out and getting the win last night in a game that the final score probably isn't reflective of how close it was towards the end. But I mean, at the same time, like it felt fitting. The Sixers were leading 1-1 at the end of the first quarter, but realistically, it felt like every time they got to 5 or 6 points, that I mean, Boston would either just hit a shot or, the Sixers couldn't really hit that shot to swing the crowd. The biggest one to me was in the third quarter. It was 74-72. They'd really gone on a run. And then they just had a 3 to tie it. And Harden missed. Boston goes down the floor. They get a shot. And, give Boston credit. That's why this is why they've been in these situations before. Like it felt like every time, because Boston didn't even shoot that well. It's just that every time they won those little battles. Like they created the extra possessions along the offensive boards, and it buys you 2 or 3 looks. And like Boston just has enough guys that eventually those looks are going to go down. Like whether it's Al Horford, whether it's Marcus Smart, whether it's Malcolm Brogdon, like it does feel like it's been somebody different every game. I mean, it was Horford in game 3. It was Brogdon and White specifically in game 2, but and that kind of gets into the margin for error too. Like the Sixers' margin of error is lower than Boston. We knew that. But yeah, I mean, I think it was the story from game 3 was the winning of those battles. I think for Boston, just creating those extra possessions. And then just, yeah, James Harden and Tyrese Maxey were terrible. Like every Sixer not named Joel Embiid, PJ Tucker, and D'Anthony Melton was pretty bad. But specifically Harden. I mean, Harden after, again, an absolute masterclass in game 1, like vintage MVP James Harden has gone 3 of 23 from the field since then. And I think it brings back all the concerns that we've seen with James in the playoffs. And like, I don't really want to just harp on one person because I do think it's more than that. But I think what concerned me about Harden the most is just how passive he got then too. Is like he was driving in the lane and just not making, either turning the ball over or not going up when he had a real shot of drawing contact and getting fouled, and go to the line where he at least was get something going. Like that's a great place to maybe springboard this in places where he has in the past where he's been struggling, where, he just didn't do that last night. Like he was deferring a lot. Maxey was really inefficient from the field, but at least I feel like Maxey was in attack mode. He just wasn't hitting jumpers.
Yeah, it just, dude, the game to me felt like, I know you don't want to put it on one person. It felt like from Harden's inefficiency, they got dug into a hole that was too deep to dig themselves out of. And anytime they got close to digging themselves out was when Boston would make a rally and go on a run or start pulling away again. And so they just couldn't get them out of that rut. And that was the most frustrating part of that whole game was just, it's like, man, anytime we even remotely got something going, Boston would get it back, and then we just wouldn't be, it would take 7 or 8 points until we could finally figure it out again and try to close the gap. And nothing ever seemed to fully click.
No, and that's the thing is, again, I mean, Tatum took over late, but game two, obviously, he didn't really do that much. But I mean, he was 3 of 11 from beyond the arc. Horford obviously was great last night. He had 17 points, 5 of 7 from three. But I mean, yeah, like Brogdon was 4 of 12 off the bench. Derek White only had 13. Marcus Smart was 5 of 15. Like,
And that's what I mean is like, man,
it's not
that
like
was a
right. It's not like they were flame throwing like they were in
no.
game two. Game
That
two,
was
they just you could sell yourself on saying, "Hey, Boston in the second half hit literally every shot."
right, and
But
that's what I mean. That's why it was so frustrating. Is like the game is wide open. Like
yeah, it
you
was
can
there.
go grab it, just go get it. And anytime it felt like the door was open to grab it, the Sixers were hesitant to put their hand in, and then the Celtics would slam the door again.
No, and realistically, I mean, you got 14 out of Melton, you got 10 out of George Niang. Like the bench wasn't even really the issue. It's just the starters. Like, it's again, even Tobias Harris, 7 points. Like that's a guy you need to step up. I mean, you got 9 out of PJ Tucker.
Yeah.
Not going to blame it on
On
him.
his birthday.
Yeah, on his birthday. I mean, Melton was everywhere. So again, 14 out of him, but he was everywhere on defense. Embiid, though, on one leg, it's like, he rightfully struggled in game two, and you just kind of knew that was going to happen. And realistically, that was the big question. It's like, what are you getting out of Embiid at all? And
One is just
if you
like
told me I got
right.
30 and 13 out of Joel Embiid last night, it's like, yeah, the only question I would have is, did somebody else step up? Who was going to be that guy? And you're right. It's just, and that's where Boston has more depth, and it's kind of what you expected, right? I mean, they have their two elite guys in Tatum and Jaylen Brown, but it's like you have other guys that could step up and answer the call. The Sixers have that to an extent, but they certainly didn't last night. And that does come down to their starters a little bit. Boston has the personnel to swarm them. So I think, again, you got to give them credit too. Like they have a lot of good perimeter defenders. We talked about that as being one of the big keys going into this series. But it was a disaster class from James Harden. Like there's no way around it. It was, the turnovers are brutal. And you're right. Every time it felt like they battled back into that game and were rightfully in it. And I think that to me is what's more frustrating is that, when Boston was running through the East last year, they felt like a juggernaut. Like I'm still a bit surprised that they didn't win the title last year. Like it really felt like they had something magical, that everything was going correct for them. And I guess it took everything that Steph Curry had to win that series. This year they feel a little more vulnerable. And I think that's what's more frustrating is it's like, if you get even average contributions from James Harden and Tyrese Maxey, you had a real chance to win that game. I mean, now you're at a point where obviously game 4 is must win for the Sixers. If you're the Celtics, you've really got a chance to put the hammer in this. I mean, if you go into Philly, you win both these games, go back to Boston in game 5, like, I don't know. With a limited Embiid, you got to feel pretty good about your chances to close this out if this is how the other two top guys are going to play. And yeah, I mean, as much as I want to dump on everything else, like, again, we know how I feel about Doc Rivers. I don't think Doc Rivers has had a terrible series in terms of his rotations. Like,
well, I texted you after game 1. I texted you after game 1, and I was like, damn, we got to give him credit. Like, I want to hate on him, but like he did good there. So it's just, at the end of the day, like you alluded to it, Embiid's fatigue at the end of the game. We started seeing some fouls come through that were just like, that's just him being gassed. And it's like somebody else has to step up. And there was a few times on the court where I don't think it was him doing it, but it seemed like Embiid was like, come on, somebody else do something. Like, help me out here.
Well, it was, though, and he should be. And I mean, he said that afterwards. Like, the quote that got pulled sounded a lot more vicious when he's like, I need my teammates to step up at a different time this year. When you hear it in context, it is not like
it's
there's
the same
not a lot
thing,
of sauce on it.
It's same thing like the Grant Williams head stomp. Like, the video that they put out on social media made it look so much. Oh, I know, but the video that's going on social media just starts with Embiid already in air, so you don't have context that he's like falling backwards and jumps to try to get away from him. Like,
Grant Williams afterwards was mic'd up and said they both were talking about it. We're like, yo, we were going for a loose ball. Like, obviously, like, yeah, that's crazy because Grant Williams got his head smashed into a hardwood by a large, like one of the largest mans in the NBA. Like, that is. Like, I'd be in a coma.
My head would have
did that to my head.
My head would have popped like a watermelon, like just done,
just all over.
I remember I remember playing pickup in college. There was a kid who fell hit his head on the hard floor, and there was a guy chasing him. He also fell, and as the guy was picking his head up, so probably already concussed because hit his head. As he was picking his head up, the other guy's knee hit him in the back of the head and shot him back down onto the floor. That was ugly, dude. Like, so ugly. That
Yeah.
I've never. He was like, again, concussed, so out of it, but just like screaming because they like was so confused and didn't understand. Like, yo, it was rough.
Yeah, that sounds awful. I'm not gonna lie. I don't think I've seen it. I mean, I guess the worst injury that I've seen playing pickup, I guess you were there. I guess it was probably
Yeah.
AJ's Achilles. Like, and that was crazy because it just didn't even like it happened on such a random possession.
That's why my wife won't let me play any. Like, right now, our work's doing a bunch of like inner city sport stuff with other companies. So like the other night we did kickball.
Mhm.
Got absolutely worked. But like we were supposed to do pickleball and basketball, and I think we have bowling on the 13th or something like that. Like we have all these things set up, and Nicole quite literally is like, "You're about to have a child. You're not doing any of those." And I'm like, "Why?" And she's like, "You're gonna get hurt like AJ did and not be able to carry the kid around for 2 months." And I was like, "Okay, well, first of all, like."
That was cold. He couldn't do that for real. That's sad.
I know. I felt horrible for him, but like it's kind of funny. You'll appreciate this. She was okay with me playing basketball, right? She was cool with me playing basketball, but not okay with me playing pickleball because she hears of all the injuries that are coming out from pickleball from like 80-year-olds playing the game for the first time ever. Like,
I thought you were going to say bowling low key, and I was going to say, "Whoa, how are you hurt yourself in bowling?" But then Andrew Bynum found a way to do that, so you can never rule that out.
Full circle moment.
Yeah, I mean, right? No, it's funny though, and I guess for the story, like since no one has any idea who AJ is, literally, this is the last time I played pickup in Jacksonville before I moved to Orlando. It was Justin and I, and actually Tim was there.
Tim was there, yeah.
And it was AJ was one of the salespeople we worked with in Jacksonville at the radio cluster. And so we were playing threes. We had two of our other friends were there that day as well. And so we just had like, man, we were just getting after it. Like they were great games. Like we were
having fun,
playing
yeah.
at Justin's apartment complex. Like, but this particular day, like we had played 4 games to 21. And they were just battles. Like everybody was going back and forth. It was competitive. Like it's just a peak pickup basketball session. The double whammy here is that this is the first one AJ made, and AJ had been harassing us for like a year and a half to play basketball. Like, so we finally got him there, and like he was stoked, like he was thrilled. Like we were having a great time. So we finished the 4th game, and whatever team was down 2-1 won the 4th game, and so it was knotted up at 2-2. And so you're right on the fence, and it's like, yo, do we call it or do we want to play a 5th and kind of decide it? And so you decide to be competitive. We're like, all right, we'll play a 5th game to 11, and so we get like, I don't know, maybe 5 possessions in. It's like it's like a 2-1 game at this point. We're playing 1s and 2s. So if you hit a 3-pointer, it's 2 points. And all of a sudden, like a ball clanks off the rim, it careens right to me. And I look at our buddy Andrew, and our buddy AJ's on the floor. And Andrew's like, "Did you hit him?" I was like, "I didn't clip him like that. There's nobody around me." And the long story short is his Achilles tendon detached, like in a non-contact injury. And like, it was just so sad, man. It was so sad. And like, it was just like, what a great day of pickup hoops. And it was like the ultimate wet blanket. And I felt terrible for, I mean, obviously he's back on his feet now, he's recovered, but like
had to get surgery.
Man.
Dude, but I think the thing that impresses me the most out of this whole situation, and it was probably dangerous, we shouldn't have let him do it. I do feel like we were pretty close to the hospital, though.
No, he didn't get. So he wanted to drive home because we walked him to his car, and so he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna drive home. I'll be fine. I'll get dealt with there." He didn't make it home. That wasn't her, dude. He made it like 3 blocks and then pulled over and called his wife and went to the hospital.
Oh, he told me he drove to the hospital.
Oh, did he? Oh, I thought. Oh, wait a minute. Did I just blow him up the way Draymond's kid did? Oh,
yeah. Because I saw him. I saw him not too long ago at a tequila fest downtown, and I was like, "Man, how's your leg doing?" And he goes, "Good, man. I still hold on to the fact that I was able to drive to the hospital." Damn.
Okay,
I'm gonna have to...
I hope that he did, because I could be wrong. I'm not 100%. I may have to hit him up and get some clarification here, but
I'll give him a hard time.
Yeah, shout out to AJV. I hope all is well. All right, last series, of course, is Miami and the Knicks. At one game apiece, Miami won game one. Of course, the big thing to watch at the end of that game was Jimmy Butler's ankle,
Yep.
out for game two. Still unclear if he's going to play today. I'll be keeping an eye on that. Obviously, that game's set to tip off in a few hours, so maybe it drops before the end of this episode. But they sat him out in game two for precautionary reasons. The Knicks winning game two. But I mean, honestly, like, I don't know. I walked out of game two. I got to feel pretty good if you're Miami. It's like, here we are with Miami, heroes out. They're just in ultimate zombie mode. Like, Max Strus, Gabe Vincent carrying them. Like, Kyle Lowry finally, it feels like playing the way they thought he'd be when he came to Miami. Kevin Love giving them great contributions off the bench. Like, the Knicks won that game. And again, Jalen Brunson, give him a lot of credit for taking over late. I thought Hartenstein was a big force on the boards as well. That definitely, helped them out, keep a lot of possessions alive, just kind of wore Miami down. But I don't know. Like, that felt like a struggle to me for the Knicks on their home floor in a desperate, like, they had to win that game. You don't know, two going to Miami. Good luck. And so in a way, like, look, it doesn't matter how it happens. The Knicks are tied up at 1-1. But I mean, if I'm Miami and given the way that I pushed them in game two without Jimmy Butler, I got to feel pretty darn good.
This is the one that I feel like both teams, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels like both teams are playing with house money. And obviously they're going to be competitive, but it's like, I don't think either team that loses this series is going to be, they'll obviously be disappointed, but like, you know what I mean? It's not like full flamethrower mode at the end of it.
So it's tough with me because, like, I think it depends how it happens. If Jimmy
Okay.
Butler is truly limited and the Knicks lose this series, I feel like they're going to be disappointed about it. At the
Sure.
same time, though, you're right. Like, the Knicks already beat the Cavs. Like, and Knicks fans, I think, should be happy with their season. Like, I think they're definitely like, I'm with you. I think they're playing with house money to an extent as well. I just think, like, yeah, if you have anytime you have a winnable series,
You
I
want to
feel
go
like there's a
grab it.
part of you. I mean, especially for the Knicks, because the Knicks have weirdly played well against the Celtics this year. Like, they've kind of had a weird block the way that the Celtics have had traditionally with the Sixers. Like, the Knicks have kind of taken it to the Celtics. Again, regular season, I would never pick them. I would never pick against the Celtics in that series. I'm just saying. Miami is weird because you're right. Like, what are the expectations in Miami? Because there's a part of you where it's like, you look at the way this regular season ended, and again, the way how they looked in the playing game against Atlanta, and how close they were to losing to Chicago. It's like, do we really have expectations for this team? At the same time, I'm like, though, if I've got Jimmy Butler, my expectation is to make a playoff run every year. And like, here we
Sure.
are again in the second round. So it's like, do we not have expectations? Again, we just beat the Bucks. Like, if I'm the Heat, I do think my expectations probably have changed a little bit. Like, yeah, no, I expect to beat the Knicks if I'm Miami at this point. And then at that point, it becomes house money. Like, I think everything conference finals, especially against the Celtics, who, again, would rightfully be the favorite in that series. I think at that point, maybe it becomes a little more house money. But I mean, look, if Miami gets against the Celtics after they've beaten the Bucks, like, if they end up winning the series against the Knicks, like, like, I'm gonna pick against them, but I'm never gonna feel good about it.
At that point, it's like, why are we doubting Jimmy Butler? You know, like, let's just see him go do his thing.
At that point, I start to wonder what the Tyler Hero counter looks like. It's like, wait a minute, he broke his finger. I didn't think there'd be any planet where he play again this year. Now I'm like, wait a minute, that's a 4 to 6 injury. It's like, how many weeks can they just got to survive till he can get good to go?
Yeah, and then bring it back. It is interesting. Like, I was reading. I think NBA.com put out this article where it was talking about the offense of each team and how they are very different. Where, like, the Knicks run the ball through Jalen Brunson and kind of create opportunities off that, where the Heat are creating like off-ball movement with Jimmy Butler to essentially create open shots and all this stuff. And, in certain situations, utilizing the elite ball passing ability of Kevin Love to like get these things going. So very different offenses, but both know their lanes and are sticking to them. So this series is the one I've enjoyed watching the most.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, like, I mean, Miami, no doubt about it, knows their game plan. I mean, the
Right.
fact that, again, it just feels like it's plug and play with these guys, and no matter who you got, you come in and then they're able to play well. I mean, Julius Randle's that was such a weird game for him in game two. I don't know how to explain it because, like, he was good. I mean, he's 25 points. I don't know. It felt like he was in one of those situations where it's like every time he had a chance to hit a big shot, it just didn't go. But again, still the 25 and 12, you're never really going to scoff at that. 8 assists too, which I think you're definitely happy to see. The RJ Barrett, I think, had a better game in game 2, did enough late. The big thing for them is I think with the Knicks is just trying to get the bench going a little bit. Like Quickly has looked way out of it these whole playoffs. Obi Toppin these first 2 games has left a little bit desire. So I think if you can get them going, I think that would just really make a big difference for them. But yeah, I mean, the big story of this series is Jimmy's health. Like you would imagine, like if Jimmy Butler isn't 100%, you would still imagine that the Knicks are the favorite to win this series. Like they just have a more talented roster. The Heat are going to push them every time, but like still, it just kind of comes down to the way the game 2 did, where it's like the Heat can make it interesting for 3 quarters, but just late game, I'm going to trust the Knicks top guys a little bit more.
Yeah.
So I'm interested to see what happens today. If you're Miami, you definitely, you need Jimmy Butler to be healthy to go on any sort of deep run. But yeah, I think you got to also recognize that, like you saw it with Milwaukee, like you can't play with your food too much either. Sitting him out in game 2, I think was the right decision, no doubt, especially given how he looked at the end of game 1. I mean, he essentially just had no movement at all. And which also kind of amazes me how the Knicks didn't win that game. Again, just not really attacking Jimmy.
Well, and that might be the area, right? Like the transitions in the series, because both teams seem kind of slowed up. Like if you can start to exploit that a little bit more, that might be the move.
Yeah, I mean, and they've obviously been lethal in transition at times. Yeah. Kevin Love still throwing those outlet passes. So, it should be a fun one to watch later this afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Drive and Dish NBA podcast. Appreciate you guys as always. Leave us a review on iTunes, good or bad. I'll read them on the show. If you're not an Apple user, anywhere you can find a podcast, you can find us. You all know the list at this point.
Yep, and find us on YouTube for a video version of the podcast. You can subscribe there. That way you know when episodes are coming out.